So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. It was so exciting to see everyone join me in my presentation of my PhD defense of intercorporeal design, staging-mediated embodied interactions to dissolve self out of the boundary to support felt connection. I found myself dropped in the center of an exhilarating party, surrounded by colorful particle bodies moving, dancing, and gesturing all around me. Almost immediately, a purple body rushed over and slowly reached their hand towards me, inviting me to connect. I have reached back, and once our hands touched, the fireworks of particle filled my visual field with my blue particles flowing towards him, and his purple particles flowing back and filling my body. A wave of warmth and excitement rushed through my body, from my stomach up into my face, filling me up with joy. I didn't know who this person was, whether it was one of my colleagues, a complete stranger, what was their race or gender, or even if we spoke the same language. I knew that he saw my blue aura, offered his hand, and saw me reaching back. The special moment I've shared with a stranger somewhere in the world felt comforting in its anonymity, yet it was intimate and deeply profound. So this was my own moment of going into Battery Mixer online installation during COVID, where we decided to take our lab meeting into the installation that we were showing virtually at the time, and we found ourselves joining several other people who decided to explore the installation. So if we look for the textbook definition of the benefits of connection, we know that the feeling of connection is associated with a lot of positive things like mental health and well-being, but also has very measurable effects on our physical health that support our longevity. And it's one of the key predictors of happiness and life satisfaction. And if we feel connected to other people, maybe we can also cooperate more and be more processual towards them, working towards our shared goals. But beyond this textbook definition, I think everyone here also knows how important and rewarding connection is for them. So for me personally, as one of the last babies of the USSR, who was born and grew up in this collectivist culture, and then moved across the world to Western Canada into this individualistic world, I found myself longing to those experiences of being part of a larger whole, which gave me so much belonging and purpose in life. So that inspired my curiosity in my PhD. I was striving to understand what is this feeling of connection and when does it happen and how am I really able to invite it, or more of it. So I started with the hunch, thinking that connection be experienced in different ways. So while I was focusing on the felt connection between people, I felt that maybe we need to also connect to ourselves first before we can start connecting to other people. And then we can expand this connection further to the larger community and even the world at large. So again, if we look to the psychological definition, we can cite Aaron on his notion of connection, where he describes it as this relationship between self and other. So when our notions of self and other become closer together and intersect, that's when we feel connected. So this is a useful definition, not only because it allows us to explain what connection is, but specifically because it lets us also think how we might be able to use technology to affect our sense of self and other and this relationship between them. So why do we start talking about technology if we want to connect people? Well, the thing is, technology mediates our interactions. As you can see in Professor Sylvia Penn's comment here from a recent Kai, she was amused at how we were all immersed in our phones, contacting with our distant others. So she snapped a photo, shared it with a larger community over Twitter, that I'm now sharing as a screenshot with you over Zoom during my virtual defense that allowed me to invite so many dear to me people to join me in the audience. So the point is that technology is ubiquitous in mediating our relationships, and it's not going anywhere. And as Donna Haraway and Andy Clark, among others, argue, we are cyborgs, and technology is deeply integrated in who we are as individuals as well as a society. And we need to think how we design the technology for better versions of our cyborg selves in our relations. And historically, lots of Western science as well as technology is rooted in Western philosophy dating back to Descartes, who established this mind-body dualism in his explanation of how our mind works, which led to this initial paradigm in HCI around information processing model that thought about computers and human brains as those information processing machines that have to exchange input and output with each other, which resulted in us creating the screen-based interactions. A couple of decades ago, embodied cognition took the stage and started affecting how we design and HCI as well, leading to proliferation of the embodied interaction. We start thinking about the involvement of our whole bodies and how we interact with the world with it, and we start using other senses that can track more of our body in this interaction. And a bit more recently, we can also see something like a somatic turn in HCI, where more researchers and designers start considering not only the embodied interaction itself, but the felt experience within our bodies, and maybe design technologies like wearables that act upon our bodies that can elicit different sensations that we may feel. So if we start thinking about social interaction, then it kind of doubles that mind-body problem. So now we have two minds interacting with each other, which leads to this conceptualization of technology that needs to mediate the messages being sent from one person to another that are then being coded and decoded. So if we take the embodiment and somatic approach seriously, can we dissolve not only the mind-body dualism, but also the self-other dualism? So here I looked to the theory of intercorporeality proposed by Merleau-Ponty. He says, it's never a matter of anything but co-perception. I see that this man over there sees as I touch my left hand while it's touching my right. He also talks about how we perceive others through our bodies. So for instance, if we're seeing someone being angry, he describes it in this passage. The other person's intention inhabited my body, or as if my intention inhabited his body. I understand the other person through my body. And Myers summarizes in his book about intercorporeality, intercorporeal activities as activities in which the single body's agency is subsumed by the production of we. So we no longer think about separate minds interacting with each other, but rather this collective co-experience between every participants involved. So it means we need intercorporeal design. Seems like a good theory, generally a good idea, but what does it pragmatically mean to do an intercorporeal design? How can we actually do it? So while there is some exploration in applying the intercorporeality to design, there isn't quite enough developed theory there that can tell us what we can do to design for intercorporeality. So in my PhD, I started to start with those three approaches for dissolving self out of the boundary. First one is incorporating others into self. It's rooted in this idea that our sense of self emerges from our bodily experiences through multisensory integration of our sensors when we're moving around, as well as the matching of our body image to what we see our body to be. The same things happen to the other people, but the interesting things can happen when those inputs can intersect. So if I'm synchronizing with another person, or if I'm seeing someone who looks a lot like me, maybe I can start incorporating some of them into my sense of self. Also, touch produces an interesting opportunity for dissolving self at the boundary, because when we touch, our bodily boundaries literally merge in a unified experience of touch. It's an inescapably reciprocal experience, as you can't touch the other without being touched back. And if we pay close attention, we will notice there is no separation of boundaries at the site of touch. There is just one unified experience happening between those boundaries coming together. We can also think about self-transcendent experience that can transcend our self-boundary altogether in this ego dissolution that people describe, and allowing us to connect with the whole world around us. So those approaches are rooted in the theories of phenomenology, embodiment, feminist theory, and transformative and self-transcendent experience theories. So now I want to tell you a story of my understanding evolving through a series of projects that I involved in during my PhD. First, I want to share the deepest thanks to all of my collaborators, advisors, and participants, without whom those projects would not have ever come to fruition. The story goes, once upon a time, an engineer and a cognitive scientist walked into a generative art class. They wanted to create an art installation that would elicit a feeling of connection. A cognitive scientist knew that there's a lot of research in psychology showing how synchrony is closely related to the feeling of connection. So they thought, okay, maybe we can create an art installation that will encourage this synchrony, therefore helping people to feel connected. So they thought, okay, we can measure breathing of different people. We can represent the breathing and the movement of a jellyfish. And when they get synchronized, we will feel the growth of the coral reef, this way encouraging and gamifying the synchronization, and therefore making them feel more connected with each other. We took the breathing signal, we processed it through an FFT, derived certain parameters, argued over which parameters were more important, but ultimately arrived at the synchronization score that we were then trying to maximize in this installation to encourage people. So people's breathing is being measured by the breathing sensor. They can immerse themselves in underwater virtual world through head-mounted display, through projection. They see the movement of the jellyfish meditatively swimming around as they breathe in and out. And when they begin to synchronize with each other, colorful coral begins to grow and then joins the coral reef that gets accumulated over the time of installation, representing connection that happens over time. So this experience was generally well received when it's been exhibited. Many participants appreciated it. We observed that for many pairs, the gel installation did help them move towards stronger synchronization throughout their interaction, and overall across all of the participants who saw that synchronization score increased. Participants described this experience as being beautiful and meditative and immersive. We did see the growth in the synchronization scores. Participants also really appreciated the symbolism of this coral reef that showed all of the connections that accumulated over time as different participants interacted while passing by the installation. However, the focus on the goal of synchrony weirdly made it almost competitive, as people will sometimes feel like they're synchronizing with another person better than their partner synchronizing with them, and they will feel frustrated that the other person is not cooperating as much. And this seemed to kind of get in the way of this intimate feeling of connection that was the original motivation behind the design of the system, where we were thinking about how we naturally fall in sync with our loved ones when we fall asleep next to them. So if the breathing sampling wasn't sufficient for connection to be felt in our body, maybe we need to engage our bodies fully in this interaction. So the same cognitive scientist and engineer, although this time engineer was putting his artist hat on, engaged in a different project. They still worked with synchrony, but they were focused more now on this relationship between the body and the sense of self. And because we're working with virtual reality, we can provide virtual bodies to people that can then affect the sense of self in interesting ways. So for instance, we can have this peculiar experience of co-embodying the same body with another person. And then maybe this could lead to the sense of self other overlap. We can also quite literally dissolve the body with the bodily boundary, which maybe can dissolve the self boundary and lead to this sense of transcendence. So we designed the body remixer, which allowed to have this peculiar experience of two bodies being juxtaposed on top of each other and one person seemingly embodying the shared body. So as you can see, the bodies of participants are being represented as those virtual auras composed of light particles. They can see it in the projection screen with the VR headset on to be more immersed. They often feel compelled by observing the other's body, and they reach their hand towards them. And once their hands touch, their bodies connect and begin to exchange the particles between them. If they synchronize their movement, they begin to play a trumpet sound. And if they touch both of their hands, then they move into this swap mode where they co-embody these two bodies together. So coming into this design, we hypothesized that if we're after mediating connection through mediating virtual bodies, then the sense of body ownership over those bodies will be an important factor for the experience of connection. So we conducted a phenomenological study where we tried to explore how people embody those abstract virtual bodies. We found through this process that the notion of body ownership is quite complex and nuanced. And people develop different relationship with their virtual bodies, sometimes feeling like they are others' bodies, sometimes feeling like it's somewhat distant representation for them, and they can oscillate between those different aspects. But it was also particularly interesting for us to consider the sense of other body ownership, which is not really discussed that much, which is this idea of how do we connect the virtual body that we see of the other person to the actual person who is behind this virtual avatar. We thought that this moment of touch that we designed for will kind of help to snap those two experiences together, where the virtual bodies that we see and the physical bodies will unite in one experience. And while it worked like this for some participants, for others, it actually kind of split those realities even further, that they became more hyper-aware of their actual body or the other person's actual body outside of it. And so while this notion of embodiment did affect the connection, it wasn't a one-to-one relationship. As for instance, some people will connect directly to the other person they're interacting with, feeling like it affected their relationship, but other ones will use the other person as like a virtual representation that allow them to connect to an abstract other human entity beyond that room. And while the experience of transcendence of the body boundaries was intriguing and compelling and evoked certain spiritual reflections for some people who were a little bit spiritual, it didn't quite feel like a self-transcendence. So maybe if we can't quite transcend someone's boundary for them by dissolving their virtual body, maybe we can stage the self-transcendent phenomenon to invite self-transcendent emotions like awe, which is what we try to do in this other project that was designed for the space exploration, long duration installation studies, where we try to support well-being of the astronauts, where we created a narrated journey through a series of phenomena that are known to be associated with self-transcendent experiences, such as meditation, the fire, experiencing beautiful vast nature where they can meet the animals and observe the sunset, that they can then slowly transition into night sky with auroras, they saw a solar eclipse, and finally found themselves orbiting around Earth, accompanied by the narration that was inspired by the quotes from the astronauts describe their experience of awe and beauty of Earth and the interconnectedness of everything in our planet. So this experience was designed to create this very specific narrative arc through different emotions, through designing for particular kind of experiences that are known to be associated with different emotions. What we observed in the participants that they did find this experience relaxing and thought-provoking, but it was very different for everyone who went through it. And many of the most impactful design elements were almost serendipitous. For instance, connecting with the animals happened to be probably the strongest element of connection for most of the participants. And one of the participants really experienced a strong sense of vastness, not necessarily looking at the vast Earth or vast scenery, but looking at the grass that was in the little island that she was on and thinking about how many pieces of grass there is on our planet. And all our design elements that we so meticulously designed for produce diverse effects, at least in some of the participants. So for instance, the fire scene was very comforting and relaxing for some, but actually felt very scary and uncomfortable for others. And the participant experienced connection in different moments for different reasons in different forms, but always was grounded in their past experiences. They will connect to their hometown by flying by it, or they will connect to their past experience of camping. They were kids of thinking into the experience of hiking they're going to do in a few months, or even thinking about how our society was able to achieve this technological development to be able to go into space and kind of connecting to the whole society over time and space through that appreciation. So while we have learned much from this process, those projects took a fairly prescriptive approach, and maybe this prescriptive approach was limiting the spectrum of observation that we're able to make about how we might be able to stage a felt affective experience. So if we want to support felt connection, we need to begin the design process from the experience of connection. And this is where the story takes a little bit of a turn, which I'm going to first introduce through the project of embodied telepresent connection that was created during COVID, where we couldn't have a physical connection with other people. We start thinking about how I might be able to use virtual reality in order to elicit the felt connection by using illusions of it. And I'll let my colleague John explain how this experience went.
Embodied telepresent connection, or ETC, explores how we might elicit experiences of remote social touch between people using pseudohaptics in VR. ETC is a VR experience that allows two immersants to connect remotely from anywhere in the world using only a VR headset and internet connection. Immersants see themselves and others as abstract bodies made of confetti-like particles. This magical appearance evades the uncanny limitations of current VR tracking while providing a blank canvas on which we can prototype different interactions. As immersants approach each other's bodies, they see them take on a warmer color and hear a flute-like sound that builds in tension as they come closer together. Touch between the bodies elicits a playful tonal ping and a whimsical miniature firework. Pressing onto the other's body, immersants notice resistance. This physical simulation displaces bodies proportionally to the force exerted by each participant, evoking a subtle but noticeable sensation. The sense of resistance is amplified by a growing, low humming sound. Inside the particle body, immersants can see the beating heart of the other person. As they reach to touch this life source, their hands act as a virtual stethoscope, with the heartbeat getting stronger as they bring their hand closer to the other person's chest.
So this was an extremely exciting project to show to the participants, because I could observe how they engage in these moments of co-creation of the experiences. They play with each other and discover new ways to interact. They engage in many playful and sometimes very intimate interactions. They were often themselves quite surprised at this felt sense of touch that they have experienced, where there was warmth or tingling or tension or pressure that was different from different people and different in strength. And this experience was not only supported through the visuals that they observed, but it was largely reliant on the social meaning behind this touch. As one participant described how her hand started sweating as if she was shaking the hand of another person, connecting to these past experiences. The sense of embodied consent was key to this interaction. So for instance, in the moment of touching others' heart, which was the most profound and intimate moment for most of the participants, it was really supported by the response of the other person as you're reaching towards them, and they may open up their chest and stay still waiting for you to come and listen to their heart, which contributed to the profoundness of this moment. Very interestingly, the magical aesthetic of the interaction was almost in the opposition with the realistic physics of it. So while we designed this resistance to imitate the realistic sensation of pushing against the hard surface, many participants actually tried to push it through it and enter other people's bodies and merge with them, and they found that to be the most connective part of the experience, that they were less interested in feeling like the realistic solidness of the other's body. So how can we also redesign gel by prioritizing the felt experience of connection through breathing synchronization? So to do that, we have conducted 15 semi-static workshops in which in different groups of participants, we try to pay attention to how we sense the breathing in our own bodies, how we may feel breathing of the other people, how we can mediate it through different technologies, and how do we connect through synchronization? Like, what do we mean by synchronization? How do we synchronize? How do we know that we have synchronized, and how we can support this experience? We articulated those experiences through body maps, as well as open sketches and figurines that allowed us to capture this more rich components of the tacit experience of connecting with others. And from that, we arrived at an understanding that our original notion of synchronization might have been a little bit naive. And we can actually synchronize with people in many different ways. We can connect in many different ways by merging our rings together. So one option or first stage is this notion of communication. So often people will begin by attending to their own body and the body of the other person and listening to their breathing or trying to project my own breathing onto them, which retains the self-other distinction quite obviously. Then they might move to the sense of cooperation, where they feel like they're working together towards something, and they're intending not to one or the other, but the boundary between them and what they're doing together. In some rare cases, they may also transcend this boundary and certainly feel the other body the same way they feel their own, and feeling the whole room through both of their bodies, as if they're merged together into this weird animal creature, which each one of them is a limb or lung, and they're kind of breathing together in this form. So that happens where their attention widens beyond themselves and their boundary, and incorporates the other people in the whole room that they're interacting with. So through this observation, we had to revise our notion from synchronization to maybe harmonization. So while in gel, we've thought of synchrony as this perfect matching of the rhythms, so we created this quite complex formula to define what synchronization is. Now we're thinking of it more as a harmony of different rhythms, so as if each person was a rhythm within an orchestra, or an instrument was an orchestra during this beautiful symphony. So based on those 5 projects that I described, as well as the other projects that I had a privilege to be involved in throughout my PhD, and some projects that I've reviewed for my review paper on strategies for genuine connection, I want to propose intercorporeal design. Some of those ideas have been reported in those papers, but I want to highlight the key components now. So intercorporeal design aims to dissolve self at the boundary. So maybe we can move past the sender-receiver model, take what we learn from embodiment somatic approaches where we think about interaction, this action perception loop, but go even a little bit further by considering all of the elements involved in the core experience between people in a dynamic interplay, in simultaneous interaction in a shared environment. So in this way, there's no longer a distinction between sender, receiver, and actor and perceiver, but there is just this intertried interaction. So to answer my original question, here's how we can pragmatically apply intercorporeal design. So for instance, I discussed those three different approaches that incorporate certain design tactics that we can begin to explore. We saw how synchrony has been implemented in GEL as well as in battery mixer. We saw the appearance matching being implemented in battery mixer and in ETC. We enticed touch and battery mixing and ETC in different forms. And we also extended this touch by connecting the bodies after people touch or by allowing you to hear that as heard by touching it. We saw self-transcendent phenomena in Odyssey and how we can support mindful attention through supporting meditation, which also proved to be important when we were doing some aesthetic workshops for the GEL 2.0 project. So beyond those approaches, I also want to stress how I learned that the intercorporeal design requires a more holistic approach. So we need to move from this reductionist design evaluation methods to a bit more open methods. So while earlier projects started with this idea that we can design for encouraging synchrony and it will allow us to achieve connection, we immediately designed this complex study which is trying to evaluate the effectiveness of our system in achieving this connection. We measured it quantitatively through synchronization, but ultimately at the end of it, we found that I don't really know if the people actually felt connected or not, if I see that they did indeed synchronize a little bit more. So in later projects, we began to use more open methods, allowing for this capturing richer types of experiences and more variety. And with ETC, even before we started doing studies, I've conducted several workshops and demos in different places, just observing what people are doing, allowing me to see what kind of experiences emerge for people before we can hone in on how we should study it. Holistic approach also requires us to acknowledge that the reflexive and pre-reflexive levels of processing are intertwined, while they often tend to be separated in a more reductionist approach. So for example, the actual tactile feeling of touch in ETC happened due to the social meaning this act is imbued with. But it turned the felt touched also affect the relationship between the engaging participants and the meaning that they drew from this interaction with them. Moreover, in the holistic approach, we need to think how those design approaches, strategies, and tactics are not a recipe. They don't guarantee an outcome, and they rather should be thought as a design tension. So for instance, while the social touch is a powerful contributor to social connection is not guaranteed. And while it can support a profound, intimate moment of connection, like the one that I've described at the very beginning of this presentation, other times it can create a strong and adverse reaction, as participants may feel that their boundaries are being overstepped and it actually can make them feel kind of uncomfortable. And I also encourage us to think about human bodies as the design material in our design process. So we design not only for the bodies, but with the bodies, orchestrating the felt experience within them and using them as the key primary actuator of the experience, as the bodies is what connects intercorporeality. And lastly, I would suggest that we can think about harmonization not only as a different conceptualization of what synchrony is, but also as an optimal intercorporeal experience. So we can design for all of the elements coming together in this harmonious experience. As well, it's hard to suggest how exactly we can go about designing for elements coming together. We can maybe learn from comparing ETC and the GEL project in the affordances that it provided us. So while in the GEL participants were trying to synchronize with each other and they were putting their attention that the person that resulted in having this chasing behavior that moved them further away from synchronization. In the ETC, the interaction happened when they came together and saw their hands changing color and feeling the sensation. So To conclude, my PhD proposes an intercorporeal design that aims to dissolve self-other boundary. I've described 3 approaches with some provisional design tactics that can be built upon. I suggest that we should take a holistic non-reductionist approach to support harmonization of all of the elements coming together as we use human bodies as design material. And maybe with intercorporeal design, we can invite experiences for happier and fulfilling interactions contributing to our health, well-being, instead of belonging to our community and the world we share. And I would like to thank all of my collaborators and the committee and the audience here for your support, time, and attention.